Hey, hey, you there. Hey, give me some of them candy corns, would you please? Let's take a real quick look at the tuning mechanism before we take it apart. You see the dial pointer is driven by this thin metal wheel here, and inset into the wheel is a sort of translucent piece of plastic that the light shines through to the back of the dial. This little shaft here has a grooved wheel in it that drives the big metal wheel. The little brass drive wheel is sort of V-grooved, and it grabs that metal wheel, and it works like a friction wheel and turns this. There's a lot of other old radios that operate this way. I did an Etna recently that worked this way. That spring there, I think, is just to hold the dial face against the escutcheon when this thing is installed. Looking at the other side, there is a wheel on the tone shaft, the tone control shaft, that kind of keeps this big metal wheel steady in the V groove, keeps it pushed in there. And there's the back side of that translucent piece of plastic for the light. And really, that's all there is to it. It's a pretty simple arrangement. Alrighty, I'm going to remove this dial cover here and clean it up. I had a piece of tape here on the tuning knob, and I've already taken that off. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. I know already that this particular dial is not susceptible to being washed off with water, the ink. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe it a little bit, but please make sure you test yours before you start wiping with water, even if it's the same model. You just never know. I'm not going to go crazy here. I want to get most of the dirt off. Pretty cool dial, isn't it? I want to do the front and the back. Now I'm going to pull this little spring off of here that goes on this shaft. It goes behind the dial on this shaft. So I'm going to make sure I save that. And then this whole plate here is, it's not that it's dirty or anything, but I do want to take it off and clean it. Well, actually, maybe I don't. Maybe I'll just clean it on here. But the thing is, I want to get behind where the light shines through, because this is supposed to be fairly clear, but it's pretty dirty. So I am going to take this off. And you see the way the dial pointer mounts. It's got this split collar here, just like on that other Silvertone I just did. And you tighten these screws, and when you tighten the screws to mount this guy, that split collar squeezes together some, and it can get a little offset if the dial pointer's not in there. So it's something to be aware of when you're putting this back together. Don't over tighten these screws. In fact, don't tighten them much at all. Just enough to hold it on and make it work until you put that dial pointer in, and go ahead and tighten these some more. So let me remove that. I had mentioned before in the last video series that I was doing another Silvertone right away, and I was kind of glad of it. And this is some of the reason why, this kind of stuff. I might not have known this, or I might have forgotten it before I got to this. Okay, now this guy here, this friction wheel, looks like it's not going to allow this to come off. So I have to at least loosen this friction wheel. So let me do that. There are two screws, one top, one bottom. And I'll remove the top screw, and I'll just sort of swing it out of the way. There we go. Well, it looks like it isn't going to swing out of the way so easily, so I'm going to have to remove both screws. No big deal. There we go. Okay, I'll show you how this looks here in a second. It's good to clean this up anyway. Let me show this to you now. What we have, I don't know if you can see this. we have the shaft that the tuning knob mounts onto. It goes through this bracket here. Alright, it goes through this bracket. And then on the other side of this part of the bracket is this little funny looking washer with 4 little slots in it. Little funny looking washer here. You see the slots? There are 4 little slots. That washer actually pushes up against the bracket when this shaft is out where it's supposed to be. And then the tuning wheel, the part that this thing operates, sits right in this shaft, right in this little groove here. This little groove here is tapered so that it squeezes down on this wheel, and so when you turn the shaft, it squeezes down on that wheel enough that it turns the wheel. Now there are other radios that are like this. There are some radiolas like this. A lot of I think there's some Atwater Kents like this. I've seen a lot of radios like this. An Atna I worked on was like this. So this is not that unusual a design. But I'm not, this bracket here is unique to this radio, so I want to make sure I keep all this stuff the way it's supposed to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this wheel off and put that bracket back on the assembly. Great. It looks like it wants to get caught here on this knob too, so I'm going to have to, this is the tone control. It wants to get caught on this shaft. So let me see if I have any play to get that. There we go. If I just tweak this tuning condenser that way a little bit, counterclockwise a little bit, it made just enough space to pull this off. The reason I wanted to pull this off is I want to show you how this thing, it looks like it's all metal, but it's not. If you take a look, you can see that it's supposed to be translucent, or a little opaque, but not completely opaque. It's got all this stuff all over it. I'm probably going to soak this thing in water, soap and water, and clean it up real nice, and that way the tuning light will look real pretty when it shines through it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this bracket back on, and bracket mounted like that. Let me get my grabber screwdriver. I'm going to buy a couple more of these grabber screwdrivers because these things are wonderful. And if anything happens to this one, I'm sort of screwed. I just want to put that back on so I know where it is in 4 or 5 days when I'm putting this back together. Yeah, when you get old, guys, if you're not old now, when you get old, you'll learn that 4 or 5 days makes a lot of difference with the old memory. Alright, so there we go. That will allow me to get that crap cleaned out of here, so take a look at that. Tell me that won't make a difference. That's actually supposed to be kind of off-white. Wow. That's cool, man. Take these lights out. They're just typical lights. They're both working, so I'll just leave them be and just clean this crap out of here. Yeah, that'll be nice. I had no idea this was white back here. I just thought it was unpainted metal. They keep a supply of these kind of coarse rags around, and when they get stained enough that I don't like them anymore, I just toss them. They're cheap, and my wifey always buys me plenty of them. So I am going to have to lift this tuning condenser off of here, both to clean it and replace its grommets. I mean, look at that. I'll replace those grommets, but I want to get it clean first. I can't stand to work on icky. And I'll have easy access to the condenser bearing from this side and from this side, so that's good. I am dropping the tuning condenser down out of the radio, and take a look at these. Let me see if I can get you to see them better. There. Take a look at these grommets. They're a mess. See that? Look at that. They use a rubber center grommet that goes through a grommet with a big opening. I don't necessarily have to use that approach. I'm not sure why this is set up this way, but I can do whatever I like. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clean this tuning condenser. It's the usual story. Easy stuff. So it's a little bit stiff, and I'll take care of that with lubrication. The first step, of course, is to clean that mess. That you see how dirty that is. So I'll get that clean. Get some ventilation going. It's amazing how dirty some of this stuff actually gets. Be a little gentle with these plates because you bend them and you're going to have fun putting them back. So the cool thing about this type of bearing is that you can get to it from this side and you can wash it out this way. This was one of those cases, and I've told you about these before, where it is not real greasy in there, but it was so dirty that you just have to use some solvent to get it clean. There's no other way. It's turning much easier now. Once all that's cleaned out of there, time to open a new tube of this stuff. Take a little bit of grease, as always. Touch the balls with it. Don't go nuts. A couple little dollops is really all you need. Get as far as you can. Reach as far as you can with the screwdriver without causing problems, and then you just turn it a bunch of times and that will spread that grease out. Since I can get to the front, I may as well put just a little bit of grease in the front and then call it good. What you do is you just kind of pack it down in there with your screwdriver, and you're going to wipe off the excess. You don't have to do it in there all the way around. You just hit spots. You just pack it in there. Try not to go side to side because that'll scratch the balls. You just in and out, in and out. Don't go side to side. See what I mean? This thing feels like it had never been cleaned and lubricated before. It was really stiff and sort of scratchy, sort of grindy feeling, you know. So you just get this in there. Now it doesn't always make it feel a lot better immediately, but you'll notice over the next several times that you use it, it'll start to feel better. Look at all the dirt and crap that came out of it. Yeah, much nicer, very smooth. Don't forget, to gently clean up the excess. Now I'm going to have to touch up this white paint because the lacquer thinner took some of it off. I didn't expect that, but that's okay. I have some white lacquer that'll take care of that. And it's hidden behind things, so you'll never know that any of it was ever missing. I'm going to put a drop or two of oil in the bushing from this side. Sometimes you can touch the screwdriver to where you want to be, and you just run the oil down the screwdriver. It's a little messy, but it does the job. I don't ever worry about the mess because I can clean mess up. Now my old trick is I also put a drop or two of lacquer thinner down there, and that helps clean it up too. Okay, now lacquer thinner will carry that oil in, as I always say, and then when it dries, that oil stays behind. No need to get washing these or any of that unless they're really dirty. If they're really dirty, then go it by all means. Okay, now we're gonna, keeps wanting to tip over on me. Now we're gonna clean this top. I'm gonna have to replace this wire that I've labeled number 2 here because I had to cut it, so it's going to have to be replaced. But I'll deal with that later. It's always easier to clean these things when they're out of the radio than after you put them back. Besides, you should never have to work around icky stuff. Get it clean, man, then you don't have to worry about it. There's nothing worse than having to work on stuff that's grimy. I think that comes from many years of me building engines. And when you build engines, if you don't make sure it's like spotlessly clean, then your engines are doomed to failure. And it's even more true with transmissions. I've built many of split case Volkswagen transaxle. And I'll tell you something, man, that your bench better be surgically clean, surgery clean when you're working on it, when you're working on a transmission. Any little bit of dirt will accelerate wear, especially in those first few thousand miles when it's most critical that you set up good wear patterns. Man, I'll tell you, it's a big deal. All right, I'm going to try and get this guy here clean now. You notice I use plenty of lacquer thinner to break things loose and rinse it away. It works really well that way. Alright, let's see if we can't pick up the pace a little bit. This is all important stuff, getting this stuff clean, but it takes a lot of time. I like to show you what I do, but there's so much of it and it gets a little repetitive. So I thought, hey, why not try this video speeding up thing? This is kind of cool. So take a look, watch it if you can, skip over it if you hate it, or just go get a cup of coffee while this part is playing. But remember, while you're working on your radio, take the time to get everything clean. Your radio will work better, it will probably play better, and it will certainly feel better for you or for whoever is using that radio. Take the time to get it clean. Okay, let that dry for just a few minutes, and then I will put some lubricant in there. Meanwhile, it's a really good time to spray some deoxit on these contact fingers. See these contact fingers right here and right here. A little deoxit on those, this is a good time to do it because it's a lot easier now than when it's on the radio. Sometimes mixing a little bit of oil with the grease makes it very effective. The oil will sometimes make the grease a little bit more liquidy and spread throughout the area. And again, once the oil begins to dry, the grease is still there, and the oil kind of, I don't want to say nourishes, but it kind of replenishes the grease a little bit too. Yeah, that's real nice. It'd be good if I didn't drop this, eh? Okay. So that's about as good as it's going to get. And there you go. Now it's real easy. Okay, it had become quite stiff, and now it's pretty easy. And then finally, you wipe everything down, as much excess as you can get to, so that you're not making everything all grimy and dirty when you work on it. Now let me finish this little tuning shaft, and then this thing is done. This is a grease thing, and I want to use a very small implement to do the grease on this because I want to get in some tight spots. So you just put the tiniest bit on there. That's why I want this small thing, and then I'm going to wipe off most of the grease I put on because I don't want it getting to the friction part of this shaft. This thing was made kind of loose on purpose, so it didn't require much lube. Alright, so you're just putting the tiniest film of grease there. You don't even have to put any at all, but it will make it smooth. Same thing on this end. If you just touch it, it'll make it smooth. Just touch it. And most of it you're going to wipe off. Okay. The idea is just put a real thin film. There, that's smooth as anything, and yet it's not going to spread grease on the shaft to make it so it slips. Okay. I do believe this thing's ready to go back in the radio. One more thing I need to do, I forgot. I've got to replace this wire. It's real easy to do that now. All I'm going to do is put a longer wire there so that when I put this back in the radio, I can splice that longer wire to the wire that's still there. The reason I need to do that is the wire that's still in the radio goes under a whole bunch of things and goes to the bottom of the top of the band switch, but from the perspective of working on it, the bottom of the band switch where you can't get to it. So I'm going to have to do a splice. So I'll go ahead and desolder this wire and replace it. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and solder this wire on. I'm going to replace the yellow one with a green one, and so the number 2 wire is now going to be green, and that's just because I don't have any yellow of this size. I'll have to stop by a Rayalco and pick some up. Okie dokie. There we go. Except for touching that up a little bit, this thing will be ready to go. Ready to rock and roll. I don't see any touching plates. I think we're in good shape. Okay, I'm going to clean up this tone control a little bit. I want to be careful. Right there, there is a little, it looks like a collar that is slipped onto the shaft. And I think that collar is to make sure that there is pressure on the other side of the tuning friction wheel. So I want to be careful not to distort that, but I am going to clean it. And I see there is one lonesome paper and wax capacitor that I need to replace. Whole hell of a lot easier to do that now than it is to do it later. Sorry if I sound like I'm slurring. I'm eating a Tootsie Pop. Good stuff. All right, there we go. One capacitor done. I'll get that old flux off there if I can. Perfect. All right, leave it be now. Okay, I will polish this transformer and the top of this transformer, and I should be done with the top side for appearances. Alright, so let me see if I can do that. Let's get a little bit down this shaft to get that, see if I can get some deoxit in there. This is the hardest way to get deoxit into a control, but it usually is pretty effective. And you can usually tell because if there is an opening somewhere, it'll start to drip out if you're getting it in there. This tone control wasn't bad, but I don't want it to get bad either. All it takes is the tiniest bit to get to that contact surface, and that's enough to make it work. One more shot, and then we'll call it good. When you do it this way, you have to let it dry for several hours, if not a couple of days, because that deoxit, if it's a fairly well sealed potentiometer, well then that deoxit it's going to take a long time to dry. It will dry, but it takes a while. Okay, before I go back to the underside, let's polish up this top of this transformer, and then we'll call the top side good, shall we? Well, hey, speaking of engine work, check this out. This is a car I restored way back in 2006, and it was a really fun car. This is an 1982 Volkswagen Rabbit Cabriolet. This was, you know, the predecessor of the Golf, of course. It's a real pretty car. I painted this car. I did the interior. I used to be into Rabbits just as much as I was into air-cooled Volkswagens. And this was a really nice car. I gave this car to my wife, and she and my daughter would occasionally drive around in it. As you can see, our cat Missy really likes it. Had a pretty interior. I hadn't yet done the seats when I took this picture, but I outfitted it like a GTI with the gauge package and everything. It was really neat. And it was a fun car, but there's something different about this car, and those of you who are really paying attention might notice it. Take a close look. Take a real close look at this picture and see if you can figure out what's different about it that you've never seen on a cabriolet before. It's there. It's right there in front of you. Yeah, here it is. Check it out. I set this car up as a diesel. I used to be into Volkswagen diesels in a really big way. And so I installed a 1500cc early generation Volkswagen diesel into this car, and it ran fantastic. And this little motor delivered about 45 miles per gallon. Now this is back in 07 with standard diesel. Diesel was actually a pretty good price at the time. And it was a lot of fun for a project to do. It took a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of thinking. Here the motor is pretty dirty before I washed it. But to my knowledge, I am the only person I know that has ever had a Volkswagen Cabriolet diesel. Now maybe they're in Europe and I don't know about them, but in the US I'm the only one. So I guess I'll close the video for tonight, and we'll get back to work on this, installing the tuning condenser into this radio in the next day or two. You'll see a video on that coming up. So this is Tuesday night, April the 4th, 2017. And from your Western Outpost in Salt Lake City, this is Michael. That's all for now.